Pokey Pursuing Swift students, this is Prof G. Let's start to build out the user interface for the Catch 'em All app. The first part of the user interface will look very familiar, but we'll learn something new about options when using the list in SwiftUI that will allow us to iterate through the list without ForEach. Now, I've created a launch screen and an app icon. You don't need to use these if you don't want to. You can find these files at bit.ly/prof-g-swiftui-files. Just right-click on the Catch 'em All folder and download that to your computer. Then let's open up Xcode and create a new app. We'll call this Catch 'em All. Again, this is the 6th app in the series, so all of this should be familiar. I'm going to assume from earlier lessons that you know how to add the app icon and the launch screen. If not, feel free to look at the last lesson in that first chapter, which was our You Are Awesome app. Now I'm going to play, build, and run the app. I can see the launch screen. Now I'm going to press the home button in the simulator. I see the app icon. Nice. And just so we can create our user interface, I'm going to create a temporary variable to hold a temporary string array. So just before the body property, I'll say var creatures equals, and you can put anything in between the square brackets, but I'm going to put in the strings Pikachu, comma Squirtle, comma Charizard, comma, and Snorlax. And now we're not going to try to work with a VStack in here. So let's highlight and delete all this code, and we'll replace this with a navigation stack first. And then inside this, we'll add a list. But when I type list, in the past, we just used the option with the curlies for the content. But here, I'd like you to select an option that lets us iterate over an array. So select one of the options with data ID and content and press return. This setup should look pretty familiar. It's just like our ForEach statement. And for data, let's enter creatures, our string array that we just created, tab over to ID, this should be \self, then tab over to content and press return so we see the trailing closure format with the curlies. We see that just like a ForEach, it wants us to name a data element. This will hold the individual values of the data that we're iterating over. So since each of the creatures' value is a creature, we're just going to call this creature. The keyword in is after this. Then I'll tab over to write the code, and this is where we can enter how to display the creature strings. And for now, we'll just enter a text view, text, passing in creature singular. And below this list, I'll enter the .listStyle modifier to set this to .plain, and then under text, I'll set the .font modifier, setting this to title2. And let's add a navigation title. Remember, we need to do that inside the navigation stack, so I'm going to do that right under the list. So under the list style modifier, I'll say .navigation title and enter the string Pokemon with a capital P as my title. And I see this show up in the live preview. Nice. So this works great, and you might ask yourself, hey, why do I even need the ForEach then? Well, if you wanted to use the modifiers .onDelete to remove an element in the array, or .onMove to move items in the array, or work with those commands that are available when you have an edit button in the toolbar item, remember we work with those in the to-do list app, then you do need the ForEach statement. So watch this. If I try to enter .onDelete under the list, it doesn't show up at all. Code completion won't let me do this. But if I wrap the text view in a ForEach, and this ForEach is inside the list, and I'll pass in creatures and use \self as my ID and press return for content and add creature as my value name, and I'm going to cut out the text view and paste it in between the ForEach curlies. And then in the list, I need to delete the extra parameter in the list so that I just open and close curlies just like it was before, and make sure that you delete the list's creature in part as well. Then if I enter .onDelete as a modifier below ForEach, it now shows up in code completion. Now, since I'm getting a fixed list of Pokemon, and these are controlled by the Pokemon Corporation, there's no reason for us to delete, reorder, or enter any Pokemon. We just want to see all the Pokemon that are available and look through them. So this is a perfect example of view-only data, so we don't need ForEach here since we're never going to edit, move, or delete any of these items. So pro tip, if you're only viewing data for cells in a list, you don't need ForEach, but if you plan to edit those cells, then you need to put a ForEach inside the list. And the last thing I'd like to do is to change the name of content view to creatures list view, and to do that, I'm just going to highlight the name content view in the struct definition, right click, select refactor rename, and when the code folds, I'll enter creatures list view upper camel case, press return. The 2 spots where the content view was referred to in the project are now named creatures list view. The file name in the project navigator has also been changed. And if you want to be super thorough, you can copy the creatures list view and paste it over the old content view in the comment up here. You didn't need to do that, but it just now your comment reads properly. Oh, and I almost forgot, we don't need the ForEach in here. Now, it wouldn't harm our code if we left it in, but as demonstrated, we can delete this. So I'm just going to highlight everything after the ForEach, the code in the parens through the in statement, cut that out, paste it in over the open curly in the list statement, see how the structure is the same. Then I'll delete the for each and its closing curly, and Command A and Control I to fix my indentation, and now I'm iterating through just the list with no for each. Then the next lesson will show how to add a JSON reader to your browser, and you'll absolutely want to do that before moving on to the lesson after that, where we show you how you access and parse JSON in your app. Keep hacking.